Well, hi everybody. It's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. It's Monday, the 21st of January, 2019, coming off a weekend where we dealt with a major storm that impacted the northeastern part of the U.S. I want to start tonight addressing a couple of things. This is going to be a little bit of a rant, but I think a couple of things need to be said. One, I have been doing this for 40 years. It's within the last 10 years or so when with social media now, which magnifies everything in terms of people's expectations and comments and so on. What is striking to me is that nothing really much has changed in those 40 years in terms of how people react. It's just that, well, you come into you hear from more of them. You might get the few phone calls years ago when email came into being. You started getting the occasional and perhaps more rampant emails over time. But now with Facebook, Twitter, and everything else, it's all instantaneous, and you suddenly hear from hundreds or even thousands of people. It is so striking to me that people have this general view of certitude when it comes to weather. And for the life of me, after looking back at everything this weekend, and I'm going to take you through it just to kind of illustrate my point, I really can't understand it. I think it really boils down to the fact that a lot of people's ability to comprehend is minimal, and they don't know how to read, and they don't know how to listen. Now, those of you here on a nightly basis, I mean, what we go through, the in-depth explanation, and somewhere along the line, something's not registering. So, and I don't think I'm the issue, and I don't think Joe Rayo is the issue. We were here together Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We kind of broke everything down in terms of what was going to happen. And please bear in mind that the world does not revolve around your zip code, okay? So if you tell me that you didn't get a snowstorm where you are, that doesn't mean that someone else didn't get one. In fact, someone else did get one. And if you didn't get ice where you were, well, guess what? Some people did get them. So, please remember that it's just, at least from my standpoint, certainly, I have to do things in a very broad sense because many of you are from all different areas of the country, not just even in my neck of the woods, which is eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, but some of you are from the Great Lakes. Some of you watch from Minnesota. Some of you watch from the West Coast. We've got folks watching from Alaska. We have folks watching from Europe. So, I kind of have to speak in a broad sense. I can't zip code forecast for every spot on the planet. But I certainly try to do the best we can. I also would kind of recommend that the reaction problem is also being driven now. I think a lot of this stems back to that November 15th storm, that you have local politicians, be it governors or mayors or whatever, holding press conferences. And I have to tell you, I sat here and listened to the governor of New Jersey and the governor of New York State, basically trying to explain weather, and failing miserably. I heard things being professed about what was going to happen weather-wise that were just mind-boggling. So let me just make a suggestion to both both the governor of New Jersey and the governor of New York State. I would suggest follow the lead of the governor of Pennsylvania, if only because at least the governor of Pennsylvania will speak to whatever issues that he needs to speak to. Roadways, all the things that are related to travel and shelters and everything else. But when it comes to time for the weather to actually be discussed, the state of Pennsylvania has a state meteorologist who then the governor defers to him in a press conference, and the state Met will kind of go over what's going on, make the distinctions between what's going on in southeast Pennsylvania versus northwest Pennsylvania, and as best he can, everybody else in between. I think that would be a much better approach You can't apply the same warnings and the same advisories and the same recommendations for example, North Jersey as you would for South Jersey. You're in a state where in a typical storm, you could very well have temperatures in the teens in North Jersey and in the 50s in South Jersey. So you're going to have two different worlds of weather conditions to contend with. And, when you're talking about a state that's 200 and plus miles north-south, this is a problem. New York State, the same thing. What happens downstate, what happens at the coast is different from what happens 25 miles inland, and that's different sometimes from what happens as you go further north, and sometimes the reverse is true. So I think it would be better in terms of communication, in terms of getting more effective reactions regarding people with respect to preparation, which is maybe, I guess, where you're going with all this. When storms are approaching, you might be wise to hire a state meteorologist on both ends, and you talk about what you need to talk about, and then when it comes to the actual weather part, so that to get that part of it at least clear, get yourself a state met, okay, and think about that. I think it would be quite helpful. Now, I want to just also illustrate my point here as far as folks are concerned. If you're watching this weather video, I really you're going to be a leg up on most everybody else as you start to learn more and more about how weather works. I think most of you who have been on here for a while have gotten that. You're certainly are a lot more weather savvy. I would hope that you were a lot more weather savvy now than you were, when you first started watching this channel. That's kind of been my aim, to get everybody a little weather savvy. Understand that there's uncertainty. Understand that we have skepticism in the models and how they work, and that the model is not a forecast. It's a guide. At the end of the day, you have to look at what's actually going on to figure it out. But I just want to show you that this drove me crazy. For those of you on my Facebook page, you might have seen the rant I did yesterday, because on one of the Joe Rayo videos we did, the one we did last Friday, I mean, I had people down on the coast complaining that the forecast was for a foot of snow, and just shocked that it didn't happen. This is the actual 72-hour snowfall from weather.gov, from their snow analysis tool, which I've put the link up many times, and I'll let me sneak it on again really fast for you guys. So if you want, you could even follow along. And actually, when we do this later on, when we get the models up, if you can, pull up tropicaltidbits.com and you can follow along at the same time. It might, that could certainly be very helpful. But this is the actual snowfall, and you can see where the southern edge of an inch of snow was north and west of Philadelphia, up north and west of Baltimore, north and west of the Washington D.C. area, then kind of extended southward down into southeastern Massachusetts. Then you start to get into the darker blues, 3 to 4 inches of snow. Now, this does not include in the areas inland that went over to many hours of freezing rain. And then as you get further north up into the Catskills and up through northeastern Pennsylvania, you start to get into the 8-inch plus amounts, 1 foot plus amounts even further north. And there were pockets of 18 inches plus going up through much of interior New England, southeastern New England, 6 to some pockets of 8-inch amounts. The storm probably, as a whole, I think underperformed. It did produce rather impressive results, but it probably underperformed what the models were showing, and that does happen. And you're looking at 8 to 18 inches across Maine from west to east. Okay, so this is what was analyzed. But let me just show you, and this is part of my own frustration. This was the forecast that I put out for my general reading, my general region on Friday. Okay, now you could certainly argue that the numbers inland were too high. I had that 1 foot line too far south. The 8-inch line was too far south. The 6-inch line was not too bad compared to the analysis, but it probably could have been further north. The 4-inch line, we did have some 6-inch amounts. We probably could have tucked that in further north and west. And the same for the 2-inch line and the 0 line. But, I mean, I had people that were in this 0 to 2 line thinking that they were supposed to get a foot. Where in the name of God did you get that idea from? Because, I mean, certainly you didn't get it here. And I don't even think you could have gotten, you would not even have gotten that from the Weather Service as far as their forecasts, which were even higher than mine. But I just got particularly annoyed with most of the people that I heard from that were in my general area who somehow got the impression that in this zone there was going to be a foot plus snowstorm. That was never indicated. The main concern really was not so much the snow, was the ice, the possibility of icing. Where was that 32-degree line? If you were here last week, you know that we struggled with that all the way through. So you need to learn how to read a map. You need to learn how to, if you're reading my posts you need to actually read my posts on my website, okay? You can't just look at a blurb on Facebook and not look at the map, read the post, watch the YouTube video. And I'm not saying this just to drive people to go ahead, and do that, but just from the standpoint of educating yourself, why would you make a decision based on 2 sentences that you might read, or a very, very broad statement? I can't put up a whole post on Facebook for you to read, and because you know what? If I did, you wouldn't read it anyway. Or, that's why I put a kind of a short intro statement. And if you're interested, you go ahead and read it. But I mean, to come on and say some pretty inappropriate things from the standpoint of and incorrect things with regards to forecasts, and I'm standing up for some of my colleagues here across the spectrum, not just those I work with, but elsewhere, that you need to kind of learn how to anticipate, how to deal with the weather information and what your expectations are, okay? The idea, if you were down in this region down south of that purple line, and for me, it would even be for areas south of that, the other purple line, the 6-inch line, I should say. You're running to the store for stuff, for a system that's going to produce less than 6 inches, and particularly down on the coast when you knew that it was going to change to rain and get all washed away anyway, and you somehow blame this on me, or on weather people. No, not happening. So you know what? I guess it's just, for me, it is a sense of frustration having to listen to the same utter nonsense over and over again, and people can get downright nasty over it. If you don't like it, why are you even reading or looking at it? If you're coming on here is to just create drama, you're not going to succeed after tonight, after my rant is over. Okay, so enough of that. Let's move on, because we've got a lot of weather to look at and a lot of stuff that I want to discuss. The bitter cold air that moved into the eastern part of the United States, and I haven't seen this happen in a while, but what made this a bit different from where we normally get these bitter cold air masses, usually you see them form in northwest Canada. They come plowing southward into the plains and into the Midwest and across the Great Lakes. So by the time they reach the East Coast, they are still pretty cold, but they are somewhat modified. In this instance, it was different. If you follow the isobars here, and this is the map from late this afternoon, the wind flow, you've got the weekend storm sitting over Newfoundland, producing rain, by the way, in many areas. The weekend storm in Newfoundland, and the isobars run from Greenland. You actually even have one isobar that, the way it was analyzed, actually 2 isobars that connect to high pressure in Greenland, and it's the air up in here. It's actually coming in from the northeast, crossing through Greenland, and then flowing southeastward into the eastern part of the United States. This air has very little opportunity to get modified. It's traveled over a much shorter distance, and it really hasn't had that long trip southward where the air mass modifies and warms up to some degree. I mean, it's still pretty, when the stuff comes in from the northwest or west, it's still pretty darn cold. But this one coming in from the northeast, this is where you could wind up a setup where you drive below zero temperatures down the coastal areas and through upstate New York and New England. This is where you get lows down at at ridiculous levels for places like New York City, Philadelphia, and on up through Boston. And the other big deal today, of course, was the wind, which was insane. I mean, I had gusts to almost 60 miles an hour this morning on Long Island, and we even had some. I was in the clouds where in my neighborhood in central Long Island. I was in solid cloud cover. I could see the clearing line to the east. I could also see the virga from the ocean effect snow that came in, and the Long Island sound effect snow that occurred over parts of the eastern half of Suffolk County. So those areas have been, except for the November system, have been in the relative snow hole that has developed from Boston down to about Philadelphia. That was your little treat today, but it was the kind of snow where, as Bill Uber said on his on the chat before we got started, that it could have snowed like this for 2 days and you still wouldn't have been able to put down much more than a coating. I mean, that's how light it was and how fine the snowflakes were. So we've got this high is already moving east. The gradient is going to relax soon in the over the northeast as the high moves out, and the next system is getting ready. And we've got low pressure back into Colorado, and that is producing a large swath of winter storm warnings, even some blizzard warnings in eastern Colorado and in northwestern Kansas. And we've got winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings that extend all the way up through the Central Plains and into the Great Lakes. And we're going to break that down for you as well. As far as the cold air, this was at 4 o'clock this afternoon. You had temperatures down in high temperatures down in Georgia in the 40s and 50s, and even down into Florida. It's bone dry. I mean, if you look at the ob here, I believe that's probably Sarasota with a 65 temperature and a 34 dew point. I mean, just absolutely delightful air going down into central and south Florida. And going further north, it's in the 60s with dew points and 50s with dew points down in the low 40s. So that cold air actually made it bled down pretty far south, although in terms of extremes, you're looking at temperatures, the freezing line probably somewhere across North Carolina today, as far as where temperatures didn't get above 32. But you go a little further south, it was upper 30s and low 40s, and low 40s across northern Georgia and 20s across Tennessee, eastern Tennessee and Kentucky. And then you start to get into the mid-20s and teens, and of course out by, for my area, many areas, 15 was the maximum as far as the highs were concerned. And further north, you see these 4 o'clock numbers. There were a lot of spots that were still below zero. So we're talking some serious cold air that had come down from northeastern Canada. Here's the as of right now on the NOAA.gov Nowcast site, which I'm still learning to try to use with the menus and everything else. But I put this up. The darker blue here in interior South North Carolina. That's the southern. That looks to be the southern edge of this looks to be close to where the freezing line is. Okay, running across North Carolina through Tennessee and cutting Missouri in half. You're starting to see, by the way, some of the warmer air that's beginning to move out of the southwest and out of Texas and Mexico, and then moving up into the southern plains. So this is going to be part of the warm-up that is headed into the eastern part of the U.S. And it's going to be fast. It's going to be a fast bounce up. As this cold air pulls out, you're going to see a very rapid bounce up. So let's go to the watches and warnings here. on across the country. Pretty busy. About as wintry as you're going to have in January. You've got this rather large area of winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings, and blizzard warnings, extending from the Rockies across the Central Plains and up into the Great Lakes. Just have new winter storm warnings that were put up, by the way, in northeastern Iowa and in through southwestern Wisconsin. And there's winter storm watches that extend east from there, including Milwaukee, by the way, that run across the state to the shores of Lake Michigan. You've got 2 counties on the Kansas side and a bunch of counties on the Colorado side that are sitting in a blizzard warning at the moment. And to the north and west of there, we've got winter storm warnings that run up into Wyoming and Montana, also back through parts of Utah. You've got a large area of wind advisories and high wind warnings back through Nevada, down in Southern California, across parts of eastern Arizona, New Mexico, and then some wind advisories into Texas. And in the Northeast, the wind advisories are all done for the most part, but we have a usual array of wind chill advisories and wind chill warnings. It's cold. I think if you understand the fact that it's 0 or less, you kind of have it figured out that it's really pretty cold. So if you throw in a 20, 30 mile an hour wind, you also pretty much kind of have it figured out that it feels worse. Okay. I don't know if you're really advising too many people of something they didn't already know, but no matter, especially in the Northeast, you kind of know that this is how it's going to be. You put up a wind chill advisory in the Southeast, I get that. That makes sense, okay? But in the Northeast, not so much. In the Great Lakes, not so much. So, on to the radar, and then we're going to have some fun with the models today. Because the dissatisfied snow lovers, and by the way, I love the snow weenies. I don't want anybody to think I don't love snow weenies. I know you snow weenies watch. I've always said I'm deep down inside, I'm one too. But I gotta keep it objective. And I can understand the frustration. To me, this winter reminds me of so many winters that I experienced in the 70s and 80s, which was basically one frustrating winter weather event after another. Shots of cold air that would pull out and then it would warm up and rain. It's so hard to envision the fact that you could be below 0 and then when the next weather system approaches in less than 48 hours that you could wind up with not seeing a flake or an ice pellet. But sometimes that happens. Radar tonight is just starting to get underway with regards to precip. You don't have a whole lot going on yet, but you will probably, as we get into the overnight and then certainly during the day tomorrow, we're going to see this get stronger in terms of radar activity. Not a whole lot, by the way, from the standpoint of lake effect today. It was pretty, it's pretty quiet now. And the east is quiet. Much of the west is quiet, except for some stuff that's going on in the mountains of up the Sierra Nevadas in California. And that really is about it. The northwest is on the quiet side. So at this point, I think what I want to do is I'm going to start with the Pacific because there has been a number of us talking to my colleagues about what's been going on, especially with weather models lately. And we've been talking about the volatility and the mess that the short range is in, and an even bigger mess that the long range is in. And one of the things that we've been suggesting is perhaps the split of the polar vortex in the stratosphere has sent the models into a bit of a tailspin. You've got all these extreme things going on with the pattern being stretched, the teleconnections in some instances being stretched, that models can't seem to handle that. But in further discussion, and I think this makes a lot of sense, the Pacific, I think, also is playing a big role. And remember when we talked about the fact back a few weeks ago, when we were waiting for all this pattern change to get underway at the beginning of the month, and we talked about the Pacific fire hose jet, okay, that was in play here. We had this long jet stream that ran pretty much straight across the Pacific into the west coast of the United States, and then toward the northeast. There was no real polar connection there to speak of. And that created the pattern that we saw and the type of weather that we saw here from just before Christmas to the first couple of weeks of the month of January. And we talked about the fact that that fire hose jet was going to break down. Well, yes, it did break down. But what seems to have happened here, if we look at the Pacific, and this is the 6-hour GFS forecast, so this is for right now, and you have some. It's kind of a mess again in a different sort of way. You have actually a straight line fire hose jet going a little more than halfway across the Pacific, okay, and then you've got a trough that extends from an upper low over the Aleutians that runs down to just north of Hawaii. And now then you have a ridge that's trying to build up from the East Pacific toward the Gulf of Alaska. But you've got so much going on here. On top of that, you've got an upper low that's sitting halfway between Hawaii and Baja California that's involved in all of this. Usually in the Pacific, I mean, most times you'd have a much more straightforward pattern. I'll draw that in black. So you'd have a trough, and then you'd have a ridge, and then another trough, and then another ridge. Or you would have that fire hose. But here you got such a mess of both. You've got a fire hose, you've got a cutoff that's sitting northeast of Japan. You got the other one out here in the Aleutians. You got yet another one that's up in northwest Alaska. On top of that, by the way, the flow's kind of split because you have an upper high that's sitting on this side of Asia that extends across the Arctic region. And then, of course, you come into the U.S. and you have this polar flow that is set up. And, of course, you've got what I showed you with respect to the surface winds, where we're getting all that low-level cold air coming down from the northeast. A trough that's down out in the west. You just really, I think it's the Pacific really is making things a bit muddled when it comes to everything else downstream, and we're seeing that being impacted by this afternoon's and the early runs today and the runs from late this afternoon. Now I'm going to jump onto the Pacific map and go forward to the weekend because I want to show you how even more complicated it gets out there, because now you've got this ridge that builds up off the west coast northwestward toward the Gulf of Alaska. The Aleutian low is gone, but now you've got a cutoff, a low that's cutting off in a trough north of Hawaii that extends southeastward. You no longer have the fire hose. Instead, you've got a deep trough east of Japan, and you get a kind of, there's sort of a ridge here, but then the flow splits. Part of it goes with this cutoff low that's down, that's north of Hawaii. The rest of the flow kind of heads up to the northeast from there, and you no longer have an upper high. That's been replaced by a couple of upper lows here over in easternmost Siberia and in Russia. Again, the Pacific remains in just absolute chaos, and I think that is really what's creating chaos in the models, in the GFS, in the Canadian, in the European. Storms are appearing and disappearing on the models, and a number of you have noticed that. It really has to do with how the shortwave troughs are interacting and moving around, but there seems to be much more volatility going forward, and each run is having volatility within itself. It's there on one run, not there in the next. It's one thing to have the models have three different models or four different models now with waiting for the parallel GFS. It's one thing to have four different models showing four different outcomes, but when you're flipping in each individual model is basically flipping around from run to run, this creates some forecast difficulty, to say the least. And I think, forecasters kind of need to recognize that the very chaotic nature of what is going on right now, and much beyond the rest of this work week, I'm suspecting that we're going to have a really tough time figuring out where this is all going to be, and there probably are going to be a couple of big surprises that may evolve from the models going forward in both directions. Perhaps from storminess, and then as well as lack of storminess. Maybe where you think something was going to happen, it's not going to, and it's going to wind up happening someplace else where you didn't think there was a possibility. So I wanted to at least get into this. And by the way, it only gets more chaotic down the road as we move into February. In some respects, there's a little bit of improvement here, but in other respects, there isn't. I mean, you have a really obvious split flow that develops in the eastern part of the Pacific, a big upper high building in the Gulf of Alaska over the Aleutians. And again, depending on what model you look at, and all of a sudden the GFS today decides, okay, let's drop the trough in the west for a little while. I mean, I don't know if I believe that, and actually I don't believe it. Okay, so just to make it clear, but we'll come back to this in a second. Let's switch regions. Let's go to the actual weather going on in the coming days. So, for my neck of the woods, we've got this big cold high, moves out. Where does it move out? Off the Virginia coast. That is, different high, same outcome. Off the Virginia coast and out to the east. So now you've got this system back through the Rockies that's developing now, where we have all those winter storm watches and warnings and winter weather advisories and even the blizzard warnings. So that low is going to run up toward the Great Lakes with a trailing cold front. The cold air pulls out so quickly that it is conceivable that where I am, certainly, in my general area, that when this precip arrives, it may just be plain rain. You won't see a flake or an ice pellet. Now, what I will suggest is that this is the map through 1 o'clock. If it winds up that this precipitation is a little bit faster, which is something that the NAM is proposing, if you get this precip in here early in the morning, around daybreak, or a little bit before or a little bit after, coming off the really, really bitter cold temperatures, even though temperatures will rise, they'll probably rise a little bit slower than what models are indicating, particularly the GFS, which has been just god-awful with temperatures all the way around. But if it comes in fast enough Wednesday morning, there could be a period of freezing rain for a few hours, starting with the Wednesday morning commute. The timing here is critical, because if it holds off until mid to late morning, by then I think everybody's going to be above 32, and it takes the ground a couple of hours to warm up and catch and get even. Just the cold ground effect as opposed to the warm ground effect. It's the same concept. It's maybe for an hour or two at most where it has any kind of real impact. And in the case of snow with cold air, I think it actually is even less in terms of impact. Now, a weather front will be approaching. The northern part of this, on the last couple of runs, is looking to move maybe a little bit faster than the southern half. There is going to be a second wave that will develop and move northeastward. So I think this argues for the possibility that we could see some snow on the back end. The GFS likes to do that most times. I would say 9 times out of 10, precip just winds up shutting off at the end. There probably will be a changeover to snow in parts of Ohio, West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, down into eastern Tennessee, and eventually into Pennsylvania, and maybe even into eastern Pennsylvania and northwest New Jersey. But it'll be quick and then out as the low moves away. And here comes the next shot of cold air moving into the east. There's an Arctic front that separates a reinforcement shot that's coming down. So there's a first shot that comes in for Thursday night, Friday, and then an Arctic front will go by, and then we'll get the core of this cold air. I don't think it'll be as extreme as what we saw this time around. This high is coming down from the northwest as opposed to the cold air that we have now that came down from the north and northeast. So it should be a little more reasonable, but still below average temperatures for sure. And after that, Well, this is where I kind of throw my hands up in the air, okay? Where we go from here, I don't know. Here's why. Let's look at, I'm going to bring up the upper air, the 500 millibar map, upper air. And by the way, I think this is a good time for me to let you know, as soon as I can, I'm going to create a couple of very short instructional videos to basically just explain what these maps are and what their use is. And this way, it'll be a bit clearer to you what we're looking at, since we look at these models every day. I know over time a lot of you have picked up on things, and that's great. But if it helps, if I have cut an instructional video, I will definitely do that. I know I've said I was going to try to do that back months ago, and time just gets away from me, but I will make an attempt. But watch the upper air here on the GFS. The yellow lines and the brown lines are really jet streaks, what you're seeing here. And areas where you get some maximum wind. And these are useful when trying to figure out thunderstorm activity or just activity in general. Well, if you look at the GFS on the jet stream, you'll notice that there's a trough that comes into the east. You've got energy. This is now next Sunday night. You've got energy coming into the northern plains. You also have, you see the red there near New Orleans, there's a southern stream shortwave that just gets kicked along to the east. This is not an exceptionally active pattern to see something like this. It would be cold, a series of cold fronts, but basically storms, any low that forms to the south will be way south and east. The western systems would all wind up going by through upstate New York and into northern New England with trailing cold fronts behind, and that's it. Okay, so that was the GFS. Now let's take a look at the European. I don't have the same map to compare head to head, but the European has kind of a different idea going forward for the same time frame. It's all fine and dandy through what happens this week. They're all on the same page. But where they differ as we get into the weekend, and let me just back to Friday. You see there's a trough on the southern end here, back from Texas down through West Texas and into New Mexico. That drops into the Gulf of Mexico. You've got a short wave in the north that's swinging across the Great Lakes and into eastern Canada. That is bringing back cold air, or attempting to bring back cold air into the east. The southern short wave tries to lift up. There's yet another short wave of consequence dropping into the northern plains. So the southern stream system, this is what the Europeans been making a storm with the last couple of days, but it gets kicked out offshore because the next trough is dropping in and moving along. All right, so that is the Europeans' view. Let's look at the Canadian view. And I've been joking about the fact that the Canadian basically will create at least one apocalyptic solution in every model run, sometimes two, okay? But it will do at least one. And here is the standpoint of the Canadian and its apocalyptic solution. Going from late this week as it drops a trough into the Great Lakes, but you notice it already looks a lot different than either of the other two models. And it takes all this energy, that dark blue spot that you see at the top of the screen there, and this is for Saturday, plunges southward where you have this incredibly deep trough that sets up just south of Chicago. There's a closed upper low that's sitting in eastern Illinois, western Indiana, strong southerly flow along the east coast, and then that cutoff gets driven toward Virginia, eventually just lifting up to the northeast. Totally different from the European and from the regular GFS. And then we have the parallel GFS late this afternoon that actually, now that it's in, kind of looks like the Canadian to some degree, but not nearly as dynamic with that northern stream, but actually has more fun with the southern stream part of this, and it lifts it right up the east coast in negatively tilted fashion. The trough axis is northwest to southeast, so we're talking about strengthening here, a lot of energy, and yet another short wave that drops in behind it and then lifts up to the northeast. Okay, clearly there is a problem here. All right, clearly there is way too much chaos in the models to come to any sort of even remote conclusion over where this forecast is going to be going forward in the longer term. I'll show you on the surface. I'll put the snow lover. The snow lovers are going to love the parallel GFS. You guys are going to be, really, really hoping for this outcome. Drive for the weekend. You saw how the parallel GFS and what it did with the trough, and look what it does late this afternoon. It makes this animal storm up the East Coast, just offshore the coastline, moving northeastward. Big snows for the big cities for the most part, except for Boston. This would be New York and Washington, Philadelphia doing well, and Boston not so much. And even for me, the low center actually touches central and eastern Long Island. Gets incredibly deep, 961. Is it fiction? Yeah, I think at this point we have to say that it's fiction. And then it had that system right behind it, which suddenly kind of starts to rev up a couple of days later, just south and east of Cape Cod, and you've got some snow, a more moderate system, of course, into eastern Pennsylvania, over up into New England, and more cold air behind it. All right, that's all fine. That's marvelous fantasy. Now, the GFS from late this afternoon, to just give you the other extreme, has, we'll let it load. So let me just back away. So here we have, going into the weekend, cold and dry, cold front on Sunday night, low that moves north of the lakes and north of New England, in fact. Then a diver comes down into northern Illinois, pivots around, and then that goes by, and that's just a simple cold front as well. And then the whole upper air just basically falls apart after that to some degree. The Canadian, again, at least one apocalyptic view, and this one, not, again, some similarities to that parallel GFS from late this afternoon. A deep low east of the Delmarva Peninsula, but the Canadian, as it loves to do, it erodes the cold air completely. It rains all the way up to Williamsport and PA and through all of upstate New York. Now, wouldn't that be just a real kick, rear end kick, to have this bitter cold and this 1 foot plus snowstorm that you had over a good chunk of upstate New York, only to be followed by a week later by a storm that brings rain all the way up to Plattsburgh and up into central Maine, for God's sake. I mean, that is truly bizarre, but again, it's because of what it does with that, taking the whole vortex and just basically dropping it down. And then, of course, it's got another one after that, a couple of days later. All right. Yeah, okay. So the European, and we'll have to use the other maps because we don't have preset maps for the European. I'm showing you this again because at least you're getting a sense of just how chaotic everything is at the moment. And sometimes in that chaos, big events do happen. Sometimes, not always. But sometimes in chaotic situations when the models are extremely chaotic, the atmosphere is extremely chaotic, it gets resolved somewhere. But here's Sunday. Let me go back to Saturday. Okay, so here's Sunday. You have a low in the central Gulf, and you've got a low up in the northern lakes with a front. There's a high east of Lake Winnipeg. Then 24 hours later, you've got a 995 low there on the Florida coast just south of Jacksonville. High pressure kind of enveloped, bananaed around from the plains, the northern plains, coming over the top into the lakes and trying to build into parts of New York State down to the coast. But because of the flatter nature of the flow and more troughing back to the west, the Florida low gets kicked out pretty far offshore. Maybe you'd get snow in eastern North Carolina, coastal areas of Virginia up to about Delaware, and gone. And then here comes the next one for 240. So we're not going to get any clarity about anything much beyond the latter part of next week for quite a while. Okay, we're not going to magically wake up at tomorrow and look at the overnight runs and even be remotely close to seeing what's been figured out. But at least I want you to leave today with the high degree, the even higher degree. It's always high. It's even higher this time around. The high degree of uncertainty that we have working on the in the weather world going forward. Okay, so please understand that. Mark G, you got the right idea. When is opening day at Yankee Stadium? Exactly. As cold as it was today, that's what we really should be thinking about, is some springtime stuff, because it was just it was just god awful this morning, and getting around outside, it hurt to be outside today. The gaming crasher from Northern Ontario, temperatures minus 40s and wind chills in the minus 50s, and you feel very Canadian. I'll bet you do. And let me, by the way, since you bring it, you have brought it up, and I keep meaning to do this, and I keep forgetting. So sometimes I need gentle reminders with this stuff. So let me take a look. Let's take a look in Eastern Canada, because one of the things I did notice today, so this should make you snow lovers feel a little bit better. I'm going to use the parallel GFS. So let's take the most apocalyptic one of the apocalyptic solutions, and see where it goes. Oh, we can't. It doesn't show Eastern Canada. All right, sorry about that. So we got to use the regular GFS. Oh well. So let's use the regular GFS, and let's get the Canada view. For you snow lovers, and we've got those of you on YouTube watching from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. You had some rain today in Newfoundland, believe it or not. For you snow lovers, the frustration carries even up in this area, okay? You think they'd get snow all the time. It doesn't quite work that way. They have the same issues that we do with regards to dealing with snow versus rain. There will be some snow, and we're looking at the map, by the way, for Wednesday, the 23rd. And here comes the next weather system. So this is our weather system, for here, for the Northeast, for Wednesday into Thursday. You've got rain in Nova Scotia from this, and snow to rain in Newfoundland. That low winds up going up in eastern New Brunswick, so you've got more rain in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland Thursday night and Friday. And then that moves out. You get a bit of a shot of colder air. And now going into the weekend and in the next week. Now, of course, we're in the zone of chaos. So who knows? Given what I showed you with the way the models work, you've got you've got issues. Okay. So, and by the way, here's a look at your temperature map. This is in degrees Celsius, by the way. You've got this this was for 6. Wait a minute, let me back up. I want to make sure I got the right one. So this is for right now, where you've got this large area of below zero readings throughout much of Maine, through New Brunswick. Look at these minus numbers for supposedly for 7 o'clock tonight. In minus 30, minus 35. I'm trying to see if there's any minus 40s up there. I mean, that's just insane. That's insane cold. I don't even know how to relate to that, to tell you the truth. It's kind of beyond my comprehension. And on the wider view, at least we can see all of Canada this way. You can see where all the bitter cold air is, and how it has moved its way southward. If you put the actual 2-meter temperatures in motion, you can actually watch the bulge of Arctic air pushing southward. And in fact, I want to just roll back to 72 hours ago, and the push into the Northeast. You really can see how most of that comes down from Eastern Canada and not from Northwest Canada. Okay, so there's your push coming down more from the north than it is coming in from the west. I didn't look at the parallel out to the long range, but before we do that, I'm going to go to Europe, because I haven't done Europe in a while. So let's take a look. And you folks in England and in Scotland and in Ireland should be seeing some snow in some areas for Tuesday and also some snow down into Italy, parts of Italy and France. And I haven't looked at the European map for a while. It looks like a deep low there in the Mediterranean that heads towards Greece. And I'm just coming back to England. Let me get the date up, make sure I know what I'm looking at here. So this is Friday. Got a weather system coming in with some rain, cold air behind it with a bit of snow on northwest winds. And here we go. This is going into next week, the week of January 27th, which is Sunday. You've got this 983 low that comes into northern Scotland. That looks like it could bring some more widespread snows to England and Ireland during the first part of next week. And then some more chances as we head toward the 31st and the beginning of the month of February. Yeah, we'll leave it on the table. So, pretty active pattern there going on in Europe. Sorry, I didn't get a real chance to get into it in terms of what's happening with the upper air there. But I'll try and do that tomorrow before I come on and get all prepared so I can give you a bit better analysis of what to expect. So on the chat board tonight, going back, we've got didn't Joe Rayo? He didn't say he didn't trust the 18Z runs. Yes, and I somewhat agree with them. It's not really a matter of trust, but I will tell you that the 18Z run is only the GFS there and the parallel. The Canadian's the 12Z, the European is the 12Z run. So I'm using the latest run. I could go back and look at the 12Z and use that in comparison. And the 12Z run was different from the 18Z run, which was different from the European and the Canadian. So it doesn't really make too much difference which series we use. I think the illustration of the problem in terms of the forecast remains the same. Let's see. Just trying. I was very disappointed, Linda Hernandez. I watched the Saints. You know, when I can't root for the Giants, I root for the Saints because I lived in New Orleans, and I was a big Saints fan while I lived there, and really enjoyed the energy that New Orleanians had for the Saints during their dark times, let's call it, when they still hadn't had a winning season up until the time I was there. The best they could do was on one of the years that I was there, they had a 500 season. So when they won the Super Bowl that first time, it was just, I felt the happiness because knowing how much it meant to the folks in New Orleans. So it was very, very tough watching the Saints lose yesterday. But and now I really don't have anybody to root for in the final. I could care less about, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm letting my football show, okay? I love you, LA. I love you, Boston, just so you know. All right? But we'll just kind of be neutral and make it a non-event as far as how I feel with regards to the Super Bowl. How many GFS models out there? The ensembles, I forgot. There's 20. I think there's 20 some odd members of the GFS ensembles. I think there's like 52 members of the European. That really is so helpful to have 52 variations of the model, which all they really serve to do is confuse everybody even more. And then you look at the ensembles, which is pretty much you look at the ensemble mean, which is pretty much an average of all the different members. And my response to that is that, well, really, what good is that from a practical forecast standpoint? And then everybody's starts looking at the individual members. Well, they're all clustered in, and I do it too. I mean, they're all clustered in this particular spot, or in that particular spot, or they're all clustered to the southeast of the mean or northwest of the mean. And at the end of the day, I just kind of focus on the operational. I'll look at the ensembles if I'm really confused, but I don't really find them particularly useful when it comes to making a decision going forward. I've seen it too many times where the ensembles show one thing, and you get the operational sort of hinting that something's going to be a bit different, and a lot of times the operational has the better clue as to what the final outcome is going to be. So Coming up to 8 o'clock, we've spent a good 55 minutes on this show tonight. Sorry for the rant at the beginning, but I think it needed to be said. Thanks so much for being here. For those of you who are on from my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee, or from New York, New Jersey Stormwatch page, I see Howard Vanderhoff was on earlier. He's one of the guys who runs that page. Thanks for being here. For those of you who are from, did I leave? Oh, Angry Ben's Angry Weather. Thanks for being here tonight. So going forward, here's what we're doing tonight. We'll have the Joe and Joe Weather Show on Facebook at roughly 9:20, 9:25 Eastern Time. And tomorrow we're just going to be on regular schedule. I'll probably try and throw a post for my Patreon members tomorrow morning. Take a look at what the overnight models did and what the outlook is for the rest of the week at least. And we'll be back tomorrow night right here on YouTube with our regular YouTube show at 7 o'clock. Just to mention, I have a weather platform on Patreon. It's a crowdfunding site, and I created a weather platform on that site that gives you even more weather coverage than you could possibly imagine. We get into a lot of things, including maybe occasionally putting your hand into forecasting what's happening for your particular area, just to see how you do. We tried that with the snowstorms, the snowstorm last week, and I still have to go over the maps that were submitted. But you might like it. Live streams just for Patreon members. You can message me anytime, and much more. And that's only $2 a month, and it goes a long way to support what I do on my YouTube channel and everything else that I'm doing, and I really, really appreciate it. Also, for those of you who are have the an Android device versus an iPhone, I've got my app out on Google Play. It's been out for a few months. I still do not have the iPhone version yet. As soon as I do, I'll let you know. But this one's free, and it covers the weather from northern New Jersey to southern Connecticut, the Hudson Valley, New York City, and Long Island. But I do have stuff on there that when I write about the long range in more general terms that you might find interesting. So you don't have to necessarily be in that geographic area in order to get some use out of it. So there's the link for Google Play. You got the link up for my Patreon page. So now I can make this big Patreon sign just a little bit smaller. And that's it for tonight. Have a great night. Dinner time for me. Love all you snow weenies out there, okay? I don't want you to get the impression that I don't. I understand it's very frustrating. You want to have at least one snowfall for the winter. The November one almost doesn't even count in your mind. So I get that. So I would just suggest maybe try to kind of weave in a little bit more knowledge of the weather models and how weather works in your approach. It'll make you a little less emotional and a bit more sane in all of this. All right? Have a great night and a great day coming up for tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock right here on my YouTube channel. Good night, everybody.